Yeah, it cuts. I mean, it's basically probably similar to Advantech in that it seems like a high-end OSB. It's not like, a really splintery commodity OSB.
Yeah.
I love the concept of high-end OSB.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. I'm joined by Associate Editor Matt Milham.
What up?
Rob Watzak, Digital Brand Manager.
Hi.
And producer Jeff Rose.
Hello.
You can email us your questions at fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
I'm going to dive right into it. So we got some good reader feedback on a couple recent podcasts. I'm going to start with a letter we got from, I don't know. I'm a longtime listener of the podcast and appreciate all the information you guys provide. I always look forward to seeing what topics you'll discuss and always learn from the discussion. I appreciate all your efforts in keeping the craft alive. Over the years, I do have a favorite podcast, which I still listen to frequently, episode 55. In this podcast, each of you selected tools for a job with a $2,500 budget. Since you publish an annual tool review issue, and each issue of Fine Homebuilding includes a column on new tools, can you incorporate a discussion on tools more often in your podcast? Some suggestions include doing a similar episode to 55 once a year with a smaller budget for a different project, bathroom, kitchen, basement, addition, etc., and for different trades, roofing, masonry, electrical, plumbing, finished carpentry, etc. Also, maybe include a part of each podcast a discussion on some new tools which are being released, a review on new tools and or discussion of tools which assisted you in a recent project and are worth consideration. Well, don't need to ask me twice to talk about tools.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great idea, though.
Were you part of the $2,500 discussion?
I don't think I was, no.
No, that was before my time.
So I think that was Rob and Justin and myself. And I agree that was a good time. And we all had different opinions on what you should spend $2,500 for with regard to a core set of tools.
So this was basically...
Capex.
so this was basically, if you had $2,500, how would you outfit your core tool collection?
Yeah, assuming you had the basics, but nothing fancy, right? Mm-hmm. You have hand tools, you have a circular saw, you probably have a jigsaw sander. So then this would be like the next tier. What do you spend $2,500 on?
So we want to just hit on this quick, or is it?
Well, so I think we should decide, and maybe our listeners will offer some input on what it should be. Do you guys have instincts on what we should talk about with regard to this subject?
I don't know. It depends. You're talking about framing, finish. What?
Well, so we could pick it. We could pick a category,
yeah,
or we could pick a budget amount, or we could pick like third tier tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
You've already got the most basics. Now you're getting fancy.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Yeah. So we're going to prepare for this and do that maybe next time or some.
Yeah.
Soon,
and we'll think about it, and you all think about it who listen, and offer your suggestions, and we will gladly talk about tools at any instance.
Mm-hmm.
Here's Curtis from Canada. Hey guys, you had someone from Canada write in about going to school to obtain their red seal in a trade or find a job and learn a trade that way. I'm a journeyman carpenter with my red seal certification, so this is actually someone who
went through it,
and thank you, Curtis. I worked for about 10 years prior to my 4 years of school. They required 2 months in class and 10 months of work experience. So in my case, I had enough on-site hours to take my school all at once if I wanted to. The problem with the carpentry program here in Calgary, Alberta, is you become a generalist. We spent more than a year on concrete, which I have no interest in. Also, some of the learning material is years behind the industry. Does that sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Europe's model of breaking the trade down and offering more specific aspects of carpentry is, in my opinion, far better. You can, however, take specific programs for cabinet making, tile setting, masonry, and, of course, electrical and plumbing. At the end of the day, I would recommend that if someone is looking to make a career change, they should find a job with a renovation company and see what sparks their interest and dive into that through school or a patient mentor. I love that he says patient. I would say if you can't find a patient mentor, any will do.
Yeah, because you'll learn about dealing with your coworkers that way too, right?
I really tried be patient with rookies, but I find it difficult.
Yeah.
It's like you assume they know stuff and they don't.
See, I remember back when I was working as a lead carpenter, I guess it depends on your personality. I kind of liked the fact that I'd have maybe 3 guys working on a job site, and I'd have to bounce around at the beginning of a project and kind of assess how much hand-holding they
Right.
would need.
What do they
and,
know?
And how often I had to come back and check in. And
So what's the longest you would let someone with limited experience go without checking in?
I don't know if I could put a number on it. It really depends on the task. It's so specific, you know. I mean, there was one guy who was jackhammering a hole in a wall all day long, and he never made it bigger than a foot wide.
How is that possible?
It was really hard concrete. We actually we borrowed the jackhammer from our concrete guy, who was a great guy and always willing to help us out.
So is this a big air power jackhammer that road
it was
crews
like
use,
one
or
of
the
the
electric ones?
It was one of the biggest electric ones
Okay.
you can buy, and we actually broke the thing. I don't know.
That's how you really test if someone is going to work out or not. Are they willing to do this horrible job for all day and not make any progress?
Yeah.
I think it's better to have a horrible job that you actually see some results.
Yeah, that's true.
You got anything to add about this journeyman learn to trade kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Just trying to figure out what you want to do before you. But I mean, I would assume, having already had 10 years of experience, he'd already kind of should have had an idea of what he wanted to get into before he went through the program. But
Yeah,
I
I think his, for logical reasons, getting the certificate, I'm sure he imagined would lead to better job opportunities and wages, right?
Yeah,
Better
I mean, that's the main
credentials.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, back to that point about trying things out. I mean, I think that's a great idea. It's like
Me too.
I've got a daughter who's going to be in college in a few years, and I tell this to every young person I know: do internships.
Yeah.
I mean, this is kind of a different scenario, but it's like do something in the field you think you're interested in before you commit to it. So if you really like it.
The thing about a remodeling or renovation company is you're going to be doing all kinds of stuff that's different every day.
Yeah.
And that is a good way to learn what you like and what you don't.
Yeah, it's a
And
good
do
way.
more of what you like and less of what you don't.
It's also a good way to learn about how good and bad houses were built.
Totally. And you can see the mistakes of previous remodels in just about every remodel.
Yep. You're like an archaeologist, right? Historian.
There's always some crazy surprise. One more letter from Aaron. Greetings, gentlemen. In episode 174, Hunter from Southern California wrote in regarding the lack of reliable resources for craftsmen trying to start their own business. You gave some great feedback, but I would like to add another resource. Small business development centers. Most states, California included, have small business development centers. These are federally funded, so there is no fee, and they will help you write a business plan, learn how to incorporate, understand your taxes, and think about marketing. It's a wonderful and probably underutilized resource, and that is a wonderful suggestion. Aaron says, best regards from the Steel City.
Yeah, we have a program like that. I don't know if it's a statewide system called SCORE, and it's where experienced business professionals volunteer their time. And I did this when I was first starting a small business on my own once. And they'll meet with you, usually at like your local library or something like that. And
Did you find it helpful?
I did find it helpful. I mean, my business model was a little bit more unconventional, and I think they were.
What is your business model?
They were a little skeptical of it, but I made it work. I mean, my business model is as somebody at an architecture firm I was working at a year or so ago said when I was changing positions again that I have a low tolerance for boredom.
I don't know what they're talking about.
So I've found that if I'm not doing multiple jobs at once, I'm always coveting one of the other jobs that I've done in the past. So for quite a few years before I came back here to Fine Homebuilding, I was simultaneously freelance writing, editing and building websites, doing metalwork, and doing remodeling carpentry all at the same time.
He really is the Renaissance man, isn't he?
Try.
On the subject,
Yes.
you've got a commission you've been working on.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that a little?
Yeah, so this is honestly, I think, one of the most involved projects I've ever taken on by myself, and I've got about 2 weeks worth of time into it.
Why don't you tell folks who are listening what it is?
It is I was commissioned by a person who builds tabletops out of live edge boards.
You never see those anymore.
No. Well, actually, they're pretty popular these days. I was commissioned to do a table base. She's used to buying, legs or buying custom bases from Etsy or from different online sources. But her current client wanted a table base that looked like a tree. And they sent me a couple examples. But the thing is, I had wanted to do this project for years before they even came to me. It's made out of forged pieces of various diameters of pipe, just regular steel pipe, steel tubing, thick walled tubing, so I can forge it without totally crushing the tubes. And it basically is kind of modeled after maybe like a Japanese maple with a sort of a narrow lobed trunk and the branches
It looks
splaying
very
out.
Art Nouveau to me.
Yeah, I've always been really into organic forms in metalwork. So Art Nouveau is a little bit more stylized, and I try to go more for sort of like a sketchy kind of essence of the actual natural form. So been working welding. I think I've done more welding and grinding in the past 2 weeks than in all the previous years of my life combined. Because it was just layer upon layer upon layer of steel tubing, and then to make everything flow together, I was hammering out pieces of plate steel to fill in all the
weld
gaps.
over
And
the gaps.
Sometimes even if like the base of it was too thin in spots, so I would slice a piece of pipe in half and actually forge it to be like a cap and blend it into the original piece. And
So you and I were talking about it earlier, but how many hours do you think you have in this?
probably have somewhere between 60 and 80 hours into it.
And can you briefly tell listeners what tools you're using?
So I've got a little gas forge, which looks like a toaster oven with some cast iron pipes sticking out of the top of it, and that runs off of a regular barbecue tank. So I heat up the pipes with that. I've got a whole mess of old blacksmithing tools I collected over the years. All sorts of hammers and anvils. And
How big
stuff.
is your anvil?
I think it's about 125 pounds. And so I basically started by just having a pile of short pieces of random diameters of pipe, and I just start wailing on them until they look like branches.
And then grinding. What are you grinding with?
So I have, there's grinding, sanding, wire brushing, cutting. I basically have at any given time half a dozen of those handheld, 4.5-inch angle grinders.
Corded.
Yeah, corded angle grinders. Sort of splayed out across my workshop.
Are they all plugged in at the same time?
They're all plugged in at the same time, because I used to have only a couple of them, and I'd be switching
Oh, yeah, it's a
all
pain.
the time. No, so I just basically have, and I actually used to have them all on one rack, and they would get all tangled up when I put them back up. I actually have them in opposite corners of the shop on long cords. That way, when I put them down, it's a small space.
So do you have a favorite brand, or do you buy what you see at yard sales, or how did you acquire this half dozen grinders?
I've got the full range. I've got everything from Harbor Freight up to Bosch. And
Tell me, how does the Harbor Freight grinder work compared to a better one?
So it certainly doesn't have the torque, and brand new out of the box, it sounds like it's full of gravel. But,
It does grind.
it grinds, yeah. And so I use those for the really messy grinding discs, the ones where I'm just creating a lot of chips of metal, because I figure it's all gonna get in the motor and burn the thing out in a short period of time
Yeah, it came
anyway.
that
So
way.
It came that way with metal filings in it.
yeah, if it can run with metal filings in the motor, what's a few more metal filings?
So that's one of the tools that I've always wondered about, because a grinder has a hard life, right?
Yeah.
Does it make sense to spend $100 on a grinder when you can buy one for $9?
I still have a Craftsman angle grinder that still works fine, that I've had for 20 years.
So I would say Craftsman tools of that vintage are actually pretty good in many cases. Obviously, they have crap too, but
I don't think I've ever burned one out completely.
you're not trying hard enough, Rob.
You come and watch. I'm trying hard, but they're pretty durable machines, and even the cheap ones. It's more about ergonomics and power, because
Do you like paddle switches or like something more positive?
I do like the trigger switches. In fact, half of the ones I have the little thumb switch.
Yeah.
And those things are a pain because they always pop off.
Yes,
pop
I
open.
agree. While you're using it, you turn it off.
Yeah, but depends on the task. Like when I'm wire brushing, I don't want to be thinking about holding the trigger because like I finish the last step I do is with a coarse wire brush, and that gives it this nice satin texture. And so actually I have the wire brush in one of those cheap Harbor Freight ones too with the flips, the locking switch.
Because you're using it longer, too.
Yeah, but now for sanding, which I have the flapper sanding discs, and those I use for very subtle shaping, and those I have the triggers. It's like a trigger like on a drill. And it's in the base of the handle and down near the cord.
I know what you're talking about.
Those trigger ones are nice because I actually kind of pulse the trigger because I don't necessarily want to
Full
run
speed.
the disc at full speed.
So you can turn it that way, on or off, like slow it down that way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So those of you listening should definitely go to our website and check out Rob's table because it is a beautiful object, I must say.
Thanks.
Wish I could afford it.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what's my next metal project because I'm
A big wheel, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a big wheel with like tractor, giant tractor tires on it, right?
Awesome.
No, I'd like to do some architectural pieces, and it made me think about the fact that you do see a lot more metal in houses these days, a lot more visible metal.
I think it's because it's easier to get, and the tools are easy to get now, and you know.
But I wonder too. I think my guess is there's a few other factors. One is the whole Pinterest, Instagram phenomenon, where people that might not have been exposed to different types of architectural or design details years ago are now seeing this stuff every single day. And I also think we've got this sort of new maker culture coming back, and plus, and I think that goes back to like carpenters used to be. They just work with what they were familiar with. Builders would most of them were carpenters, and most of them weren't metal workers. But now you got a lot more people collaborating, whether it be through social media, and I don't know. I think it's a good time for
Handcraft.
for design and handcraft. Yeah.
What do you think, Matt?
I think also a lot of the tools are probably easier to use now. Like the
I
welders
agree.
have so many automatic settings. You just put in the thickness of the metal that you're using in the wire, and you don't need to know a lot in order to do it.
The learning curve is not nearly as steep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could just fix my shaky hands, I'd be a lot better welder.
They've got like little wheeled rests you can use for like rolling along the surface.
I need like a steady cam for a welder.
Yeah. We could probably work one out for you.
Hey, maybe that's our $1 million idea.
Like a gyroscopic glove.
Come on. Anyone out there who's into building a prototype, let us know. You've been very busy too.
Yeah, I've just been working on a shed. Well, it's half of it is sort of a little greenhouse, and the other part is just a garden shed. But yeah, it's one building, and it's not.
What's going to go in this?
On the one side, just garden tools, and on the other side, just start plants and stuff in it. So
It's beautiful.
I like how you didn't just do a typical simple gable roof on it.
No, he's
I was trying to make it.
He's
a
going
little
to
more,
advanced class here.
a little more complex. Mostly, I just wanted to kind of, I guess, test my skills and make sure I still knew how to cut a roof.
So for those of you who are listening, so it's not just a rectangle; it has an L, right, and two intersecting gable roofs, right?
Yep. So
and they
two
look like
valleys.
they're like 10-12s.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
And they have 2x6 or 2x8 rafters.
2x6. Yeah, I could have upped the ridge, but I didn't. I figured because it's only about a 3-foot run.
I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
What are you going to do for roofing?
Probably on the greenhouse side, I'm looking at these FRP. Glass Steel makes these sort of like translucent FRP panels that I'm trying to figure out where I can get.
That's
and
the
the rest of it's just going to be architectural shingles.
Flat or corrugated?
It's basically, it's like corrugated.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know the Lowe's in Danbury carries all kinds of roofing stuff like that. They might have,
I've seen some of that stuff. I actually did walk through Lowe's and I was trying to figure out what they had, and they didn't have exactly what I was looking for. They were a little flimsier. I don't know if they were FRP. I think they were some other kind of.
I think they're
poly.
acrylic. Yeah.
Yeah, acrylic and some kind of poly.
Have you thought about going to like the double wall flat stuff? for a greenhouse
I
roof?
did look at that too, and I'm not sure
Wait,
exactly where to get
whoa.
that.
What are you talking about?
Okay, so
It
most green, like a lot of nice greenhouses have it's basically, it looks like a translucent version of that sign plastic.
It's like looks like corrugated
hollow
cardboard,
core-
but
yeah,
it's made of plastic.
Yep, it's hollow,
Okay.
hollow core. Yeah, it looks like corrugated, but it's basically little square channels.
Yeah.
And you can get double or triple wall even. I think they even have quad, but the idea is that it has multiple air spaces in between the layers of plastic for a greenhouse.
But it's kind of cloudy, right? It's not clear.
It's not totally transparent. You can get some that is pretty darn close to transparent, but it comes in all different opacities and colors, and
Quit showing off.
you can.
Yeah.
Well, you got to remember, my wife was an editor for Fine Gardening for 15 years, so I'm used to thinking about gardening
opacity?
stuff. Yeah, no. Oh, yeah. So, but no, it's pretty neat stuff, and it's pretty durable. You can order it through greenhouse supply places online.
And what are you
Yeah,
putting
check
on
that out.
with regard to siding?
LP Smart Side.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you told me you love this product.
I don't necessarily love this product. I've put it on houses before, and it's very easy to work with. My favorite thing about it was like $5 and change per
board.
12-foot, 8-inch tall board. So,
There's a lot to like about that.
Yeah.
And so it's like OSB, right, with like a skin on it.
yeah, it's basically it's got a primed face. The back is basically just it looks just like OSB.
And
I've
it
heard
comes
pretty
in
good
planks.
reports from contractors who use this regularly that it's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's easy to install. It installs just like lap siding.
Do you put it over house wrap or felt?
I'm going to put it over felt because that's what I have.
Yep. Very smart.
And so when you cut the edges of that stuff,
Prime it.
Does it leave a nice edge?
Yeah, it cuts. I mean, it's basically probably similar to Advantech in that it seems like a high end OSB. It's not like a really splintery commodity OSB.
I love the concept of
High-end
high-end OSB.
Yeah, I mean it's as far as OSB goes.
Luxury OSB.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
The one thing I don't like is the surface texture on this stuff. I think they have come out with a flatter.
So
flat
it's kind of
panel.
meant to be wood grain, but it ends up looking fake.
Yeah, because wood typically doesn't look that grainy.
Right.
So.
It's like that stamped fake grain kind of with like soft edges.
Yeah.
So to be honest, this morning was the first I heard of this project. How long you been working on this?
This was the third weekend, so 3 weekends. I mean, it hasn't been going like great guns or anything like that because
No,
I got
but
to make multiple runs to the store for other stuff.
Well, and you had to put footings in. I mean,
yeah, you can see all that black compost that's there. Had to go get that. That was another weekend project. So
that's not part of the build. We should tell
that's not,
people.
Yeah, that's not part of the build. That's the garden's going to butt basically up to this building. That's why it's
And you'll be able
where
to
it is.
get your tools easily.
Right. It's going to be inside the fence.
Sweet.
So how'd you do? Are those solid blocks
Yeah.
underneath it?
Yep.
Solid concrete blocks just sitting right on the ground or on gravel or?
On gravel on top of landscape fabric. Yeah.
Did you put gravel under the shed too?
No, but there's landscape fabric under it.
You should. If
I
you
should
can,
have put-
you
I
can-
know.
If you can get it under there, it would be good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was
even-
buying it in bags.
We should
and-
tell people why. And it's because you want to break the capillarity, right? If you put the gravel layer, it stops the groundwater from rising onto the bottom of your shed.
Yep.
So that's why to do it.
Plus it makes it easier to weed under there.
It looks better too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like it would prevent rodents a little bit too.
Yeah. Although I'm not
don't
really
know.
worried about rodents out there,
You're not?
mostly because I have 2 cats that love to hang out underneath this thing right now.
I wouldn't worry either. I'm going to keep this brief because we got to get to some questions. But so you guys have heard me complaining about the cost of cabinets for my bedroom remodel, right? So I think I found a solution at Lowe's while looking for something else yesterday. And I don't know if any of our listeners have used these Econo ready-made cabinets from the big box store, but you can get a 3-drawer base for $125. I think that was 2 foot wide. And I found a 30-inch wide 2-door wall cabinet for $87.
And so you said that's got a hardwood face frame and door frame?
It does have hardwood. This is red oak. It is really nothing special, but they didn't use rotary cut plywood on the front, which is a big plus to me. I mean, you see that surprisingly often in even more expensive cabinets. But if you look at the box construction, It's a little mediocre. I think it's like 1/2-inch particle board sides and maybe 3/8 particle board back.
There's no risk of it getting wet, right?
There's no risk of it getting wet.
Well, there's always a risk of it getting wet. You know?
My roof would have to leak, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is the solution I was looking for. Maybe my wife is getting desperate for some action on this home front, but
Yeah.
she said that's fine. And what she said is, I like the idea we're moving forward.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I would feel comfortable using something like that in a closet or a dry storage area.
Yeah.
But, certainly not in a vanity or a kitchen sink cabinet or.
because that's inevitably going to get wet.
Yeah.
But I think in the bedroom for storage cabinets, I think it's going to be fine. And I'm going to paint them. So.
Yeah.
And no one will see the ends because they go wall to wall. Shall we answer some questions?
Let's do it. Sure.
Paul from Canada writes, "Hi guys, love the podcast. I'm building a new 2-story home and my framers added Typar over the OSB before tilting up the walls. Since then, we've added the windows, but the cladding is not installed. I'm a little concerned that my WRB has not been perfectly installed. There are slight tears around staples and a few other spots where I'll be relying heavily on the efficacy of tuck tape." Do you guys know what tuck tape is?
I've heard of it.
That's what Canadians call
Flashing tape?
weather tape.
Okay.
It's a hip roof, so I have a nice level soffit to work against, and I have a 2-foot overhang. But I want this house to last more than 100 years. My question is, will it be a problem to add a second layer of Typar? It's a fairly low-cost product, and the effort seems low for when we add the cladding. But I have this feeling that double protection might just make my situation worse. And I don't see the negative consequence. Any help? Follow-up question. I need to horizontally strap the exterior before adding vertical cement board cladding. My concern is water damming at the top and sides of the strapping and rotting the wood. Is that a valid concern, and what are my best options? Okay, let's tackle the second layer of WRB first.
Not a problem.
Not a problem.
I mean, if you're doing a stucco, you would have to have 2 layers of WRB anyway.
Can you tell us why?
One, because you need to, it'll bond to the...
So the mortar sticks to the first layer.
Yeah, and so then you've got basically the second layer behind it that is
doing the
actually
real job.
Your WRB.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Typar can be used for that, supposedly, according to them.
I'm sure they would say.
Yeah. So
What do you think, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, you figure if you're doing rigid foam on the outside of a house, you'd have that layer of rigid foam and then the WRB either over or under it. So you've got the same. It's more a concern when you're trapping water-sensitive materials between 2 layers of a material like that.
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. When you're putting up your siding, though, you have to remember to lap stuff correctly, right? And make sure you tuck your flashings under, I guess, the first layer, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you want to get as far back as you can. I would say so, right?
Yeah.
I would think so.
Yeah. I mean, I assume that's already flashed. But, I mean, do you double flash then
No.
when you go over?
I don't think you do.
I don't think you have to.
No, I would just use a high-quality tape where you're lapping those
And I really
layers.
like cap nails as opposed to staples. And you can get guns that shoot cap staples or cap nails pretty darn affordably. And even for a single project, I would think that would be money well spent, just because it does such a better job. And when you're using conventional lap siding directly against the WRB, I think it creates a small drainage space.
Yeah. And if you're installing cap nails and you have fat fingers, they're really hard to get in.
You can
get started.
Yeah, and you can fit like 10 in your tool belt before you have to, reload. As far as the strapping, so he's using vertical siding, so his strapping has to go horizontal. What's the solution for that? I can think of 2.
Yeah, you can run it at an angle.
Yep.
There's no reason not to do that, and then it'll just run down it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What's your other solution?
You can get the material.
Yeah,
that's,
you can get this rain screen material that looks like corrugated cardboard, but it's plastic.
It's pretty much the same stuff we were just talking about.
It is very much like that.
Exactly.
And it's made by Corevent, and I don't remember what the product is called, but it's made for siding applications, and it's full of holes, so water would go through it.
Yeah.
Alternatively, I've seen people put the strapping horizontal because with vertical siding, it's nice to have all the nails line up, right? You want it to look finished. So they just cut little notches with a saw blade on the back of the strapping.
That's an awful lot of kerfing
It
to
is.
do.
It is a lot of kerfing to do.
Didn't Andy Grace do something like this too? He used like T111 or something like that.
Because it's got gaps,
strapping?
you mean?
Yeah, it's strapping.
Oh,
and then
you
it
just
already
flip
had
it
grooves
over
in
or
it.
God,
Yeah.
is he smart?
Yeah.
I didn't remember that.
Yeah, I think he did something like that.
That's brilliant.
That
Yeah.
makes sense.
He's like one of the smartest remodelers I've ever met. Smartest people, generally.
He's got a lot of good ideas.
He does. And he's got this intellectual curiosity, which is not a given with remodelers. Like, he wants to learn all
Yeah.
the time.
And I mean, we try to work with some of the best people in the country in the industries that we work in, and when you find someone who is constantly looking at how to make something better or how to use the materials that they have to the best of their abilities, that's just. I mean, it makes the day more interesting if you're doing that kind of stuff. I can't imagine not.
And it's
wanting
better
to do
for his
that.
clients.
Yeah.
I mean, they can have confidence that what he does is going to be done to the best practice that is known right now. We'll put links to his metal roofing article. What else we do with Boral siding?
Yeah.
And that's a vertical siding, right? Those were so.
Yep.
Pay attention to Andy. Question 2 comes from Brett. Good morrow. Where does that come from?
Old-timey Britain.
Is it, right?
Probably.
I'm a college student who is very interested in building his own home. I'm open to using contractors sometime in the future when I actually have money. So this is a guy after my own heart. I'm rather taken with the look of timber frame homes, but in my research, it seems that many timber frame architects like to use hybrid timber framing. So what are the advantages and disadvantages of a purely timber framed home versus hybrid? So I'm a little confused by this because even homes that are timber framed, you need a way to fill in between the timbers, and I'm not sure what he means by hybrid. So
I think, well, I was reading up on this a little bit, but just from my own experience, I think there's no real clear line in the sand where you're a full traditional timber frame and a hybrid. I mean, like the point that a lot of people make is that you have to build a shell around a house or within the walls of a house to enclose your timber frame. So often that's done with stick framing. Sometimes that's done with stress skin or other, prefabricated panels. So the idea is that you're building almost a whole nother house around your house when you're doing that.
it's very redundant.
And it's also expensive. And plus, timber framing is expensive because it requires heavy timbers, which are expensive. It requires a certain level of skill.
And you have to move the stuff.
Yeah, maybe use a crane or at least some other safety equipment. And
Maybe.
Gin pull.
Maybe.
yeah. But the thing is, so really there are very few houses that are 100% timber framed because.
It needs a skin. It needs a shell.
But even so, I think the idea of a hybrid timber frame, from what he's talking about, I can possibly guess, is a lot of people want the look of a timber frame, so they'll build a great room that's timber framed, or they'll incorporate timbers into the structure.
Yes.
But they may be structural, but it's not a full timber frame from foundation to ridge.
Yeah, I think, Brett, if you're looking to save money, timber framing is not the way to go about it because stick framing is so resource efficient. The pieces are little and so you can move them yourself. But that said, there's no reason to avoid timber beams, right, for your structural elements, like Rob was saying, undergirders. Maybe you want a cathedral ceiling with some cool timber rafters or whatever. And if you keep the elements within reason, it's not too expensive.
Yeah, I mean, you might want to make sure you're consulting with an engineer or an architect, or look online for some examples of similar work, because when you start incorporating timber beams into stick framing, you got to worry about point loads.
And also, a lot of timbers are not grade stamped. So when you go to integrate those with conventional platform construction, there are no prescriptive guidelines for code enforcement to go with. So then you're talking about engineers' drawings and solutions, which can be expensive.
Yeah, that was going to be my main thing, is that there's not really a prescriptive way to build these things. So it's going to cost you a lot of money up front to get it either engineered or an architect involved to get it stamped before you can even start building.
Totally.
I kind of actually did that sort of hybrid thing when I
So what do you
built
mean?
my
What do you
barn.
mean when you say hybrid timber frame? I'm still a little foggy on
Well,
that.
mine is, so you've seen my barn in my backyard. I have a barn that I rebuilt on the original foundation, and I primarily used stick framing for it. It's traditionally framed.
But you have some reclaimed timber elements that are doing structural work.
Yes. So basically, the front has 2 big barn doors on strap hinges with pintles screwed into the edge of the door jamb. And so I said, well, why don't I just make this simple? And the visible edge of the door is actually some reclaimed timbers, and that is actually incorporated into the stick frame. So I figure, well, it's going to be either a big fat beam or it's going to be a couple of 2x6s. So it's overkill for the framing, but it was actually in a lot of ways less work because I had these reclaimed timbers lying around, and I didn't have to frame a door opening and trim it out afterwards. It's the whole package all in one step.
Cool. So I love timber framing. It's a big part of what drew me to this industry. When I saw Ted Benson on This Old House in the 80s, when that was having a revival, I was like, that is something I want to do. But the problem with it, despite its beauty and structural help, is you end up building a second structure on the outside somehow to create a building envelope,
Yeah,
so
it's not the most economical way to build a house, but if that's the look you're going for, you just try to incorporate it at the level that you can afford, I guess.
I have heard people, so the other way to do the infill on the timber frame are structural insulated panels, right?
Yes.
And once again, those can be your entire house. They have their own structural qualities. You don't need the frame to hold them up. But they're expensive, and I've heard that they're very noisy. Because they're solid, sounds from outside and in the house make them hard to live with. Like you hear people walking around.
It's like a drum.
Yeah, you hear noise from outside too. So.
And nowadays with CNC routers making a lot of these components, they actually carve out electrical channels. But when they first started building houses with those things,
how do you do that?
You had to gouge out these channels or drive big pipes through to get the electric in, and it makes it really hard to do any remodel or changes after you've already start putting it in place. But, it's all a matter of, if this is what you want to do, you might as well just figure out the best way to do it. If anybody knows how to build what this guy is looking for, it's Ted Benson and Benson Wood Homes and Unity Homes. They are just such innovators in that. They have a system that they came up with a long time ago where they call it open built construction. The idea is, it goes back to, we were talking one time about how a lot of things trickle over from the commercial and industrial world that are means of making things more adaptable and more efficient to put together. They do these open web floor trusses so that instead of doing a timber frame solid wood deck for the second floor like a lot of traditional timber frames would have, they mimic that by putting tongue and groove boards on the bottom of these open web trusses, and they have complete access at any time by lifting some of these panels of boards out on the bottom to put all of their mechanical systems in.
I love the concept of houses that can adapt and buildings that can adapt. It's like, why don't we make stuff easier to work on?
Yeah, how many people have built a house and then 5 years down the road have been completely filled their needs the way that they wanted it to. People are, even if it's a new house, a lot of times you walk in and you're like, oh, I wish I put that over there.
Yeah. Lives change, needs change,
Yep.
I think it's an inadequacy in American housing for sure is how disposable things are built.
Yep. Should just build it all out of Legos. You just restack
I've often thought, why aren't baseboards removable so you can run wires? As an example.
I think someone makes something like that. It's like an electrical chase that has a pop-on cap over it that looks like a baseboard.
But it has to be airtight, right? It's not. It's as far as I know, there's nothing in the marketplace now. But it seems like that would be easy to do. How many good ideas have we come up with this segment?
Oh, we shouldn't be talking about these out loud. We should write these down
first, then talk about it.
Yep.
We'll be right back with more after this. The Fine Homebuilding podcast is also brought to you by DeckWise. Does your hardwood deck need a makeover? Bring back the luster of the day it was first installed. Let DeckWise reverse time and erase its dullness to make the wood grains burst with natural beauty again. Start with our wood cleaner and brightener and finish with our eco-friendly water-based formula, Wise Coat, or our low VOC Ipe oil hardwood finish. Protect and preserve your deck to keep it looking brand new this summer. For more info on these products, visit deckwise.com. All right. Dustin from upstate South Carolina writes, "Hey guys, new to the podcast here and already learning a lot. The reason I'm writing is because I had a question about air sealing crawl spaces." We never get any questions about crawl spaces.
Never.
I recently moved to Climate Zone 3, and a lot of people build on crawl spaces, which I'm not very familiar with. And I was doing some research where I saw someone say a vented crawl space is a bad idea because you get hot, humid air that can condense on your floor, causing mold and water problems. I'm building a new home for my growing family, and everyone I worked with does their crawl spaces this way and also says they all have water in the crawl spaces, and it's just normal. I don't want to do spray foam because of the cost. So my question is, could I insulate with fiberglass between the floor joists like normal and then seal off the crawl space with some sort of plastic and rely on ground temperatures to keep it at a reasonable temperature, thereby having no moist air coming in? Like I said, new to the area and new to crawl spaces. Where I'm from, every house had a basement. Just wondering if this is a reasonable idea or a terrible idea.
So before we answer, I'm curious, you guys are the code guys more than me. Did we do away with that vented crawl space code, or is it still
It's
there?
still in there, but
Still
the code also has provisions for sealed conditioned crawl spaces as well, or semi-conditioned crawl spaces, which is what you want. You don't want a vented crawl space, especially in the Carolinas.
If you have a choice, I don't know why he would do a crawl space at all. Just do slab on grade.
Do slab on grade is a good suggestion, but it's, in some parts of the country, because of either unfamiliarity with that or, water problems, that's not an option. Also, sloping sites, right? A slab site has to be pretty flat.
Yeah.
Or you have to do, moving of cutting and filling to make it flat.
He's going to have to do that for a crawl space anyway, isn't he?
He's going to have to dig footings. I mean, even in South Carolina, you have to dig footings.
Yeah.
I think vented crawl spaces are the worst idea ever.
They're pretty bad.
So seal it up, insulate the walls, be sure to cover the floor, even better, or cover the floor with a vapor retarder, or even better, a vapor retarder and insulation and plastic or a concrete.
Yeah.
And make it a little tiny basement. That's what to do.
Yeah.
Get rid of the fiberglass in the floor system. That's a bad idea.
Yeah, no porous fibrous materials in your basement insulation pretty much anywhere. I mean,
I think you can do it as long as you had like a layer of foam, rigid foam underneath.
Sure.
But the air sealing that, like all the perimeter of all those panels where they hit all the walls or the
and
the
if
rim
you
or
have any
whatever it is,
mechanical stuff going,
all those
pipes running through
penetrations.
there.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
So what would you say, if you had to recommend, is the easiest way to insulate under a floor system in a damp space like that?
So we're sticking with the thermal boundary at the floor?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, yeah, actually, that's a good point. I mean, but because when I first, what it is when I first read this, I was thinking that I missed the whole point that he was building a new house. So if you're starting from scratch, yes, waterproof your foundation really well and put rigid foam at the walls.
If you have to do it at the floor for some reason, and I'm at a loss to think of what that might be, I would say you need bad insulation in the floor system, rigid foam on the bottom of the joist, and then plywood or OSB over that to protect the foam from critters.
Yeah.
If you have to do that. But, why not just go to the walls and...
Yeah, you can get away with a lot. I think it's only R15, at least in our climate zone. It might be even less down there in climate zone 3
sure.
on the walls.
Depending on where they're at, you got to be careful too, because a lot of places you're required to leave a termite inspection gap.
Right. So that means the insulation doesn't go all the way to the floor system. There's a strip of exposed foundation so you can see if termites are building mud tunnels into the floor system. And in the Carolinas, you're right, that is a real concern.
Yep.
But I think in those places, people get annual termite treatments anyway, right? I think you have to. You'd be overrun with palmetto bugs and all kinds of horrible things.
Yeah.
You don't like bugs?
Me?
Yeah.
Have you met me?
So in other words, you wouldn't like to wander around in my basement where those little house centipedes are running around everywhere? They look like a cross between a caterpillar and a cricket.
I'm never coming in your house again. I had to quit camping because bugs freak me out. All right. So, in summation, don't build vending crawl spaces. Can we just say that?
Yeah.
There's really not a good reason to. Maybe if you're like in Arizona or New Mexico or even parts of Texas, but any place where it rains.
You know, when you're going to build something,
humid.
if you want to get something up off the ground like that, build it on piers, because that's what traditionally a lot of the southern houses would be.
Especially coastal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Jeff from Plymouth, New Hampshire writes, thank you so much for all the information you have given me over the past couple years. I look forward to my drive to work on Fridays to listen to the newest episode. You addressed one of my questions way back about building a good enough home for $100,000. The consensus was that it would be nearly impossible. So let's start there. I don't remember this conversation. Were you involved in that?
I don't recall. I think maybe, yeah.
And how about you?
Doesn't ring a bell.
So do you remember what the obstacle was to building a decent house for $100,000?
I don't. Other than that's not a lot of money. I mean, if you're starting from scratch, unless you already have the property and like site work is done and everything, because you're looking at what, 25 to 35 just for septic and
a well or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know. That would be it. Once again, if there's anyone willing to, give me $100K, I would love to try.
Yeah.
I'd build a small house for $100,000.
I think you could.
I think you
that's
could
my
certainly
point.
build. I mean,
it's
it's a very generalized question because it really depends on how big is your family, what are your needs. It's like there was some group of architecture students down south. I don't know if it was Louisiana or somewhere in the Appalachian Mountains that they started this program with their architecture professor where they design and build these houses that they can build for $20,000. But granted, they're in a climate where they don't need insulation.
Right.
They do metal roofs, really simple construction. And they're kind of hearkening back to the days of just the simple bungalows that people who can afford a fancy house would live in their climate.
Yeah. And I mean, when I started, admittedly, it was in the mid-90s where I started building for Habitat for Humanity, but there were affiliates who were building homes for $35,000 or $40,000, including the land. And admittedly, they might have been in places where land was cheap, and the construction is about as inexpensive as it can possibly be. But I think it's unrealistic to say, or I think it's unfair to say you cannot build a house for $100,000. A very small house, you can totally do.
Yeah.
And you also got to think about if you're creative and you're crafty and you've got more time.
And you have time.
More time than money. Like my idea, this is my actual plan for as I get closer to retirement, is we're going to hopefully buy a piece of land in the next couple of years while we still have our house and start paying it down so that when it's time for me to move to that piece of land, the land's paid off. And the first thing I'm going to do is build a little pole barn or my workshop space, probably with an apartment if I have to for zoning reasons to make it a legal dwelling on the property, and just start stockpiling. I can't tell you how many days of the week I find opportunities for used materials or natural materials, whether it be rough sawn lumber or whatever, and start stockpiling that stuff so that I can, or go to scratch and dent sales for windows. I mean, you can get near new quality stuff all the time, and on top of that, if you're creative, and we were talking earlier about how people are more into eclectic and modern details in houses, if you're not looking to get fancy traditional trim in a house and you're okay with alternative materials, like we just featured a house in our Houses Awards that was completely covered in galvanized metal on the outside. It's not a look that's for everybody, and they kind of went way over the top with it. I mean, it looks like it's a giant,
it looks like an agricultural building,
which is, that's
kind of cool.
That's their aesthetic. And it's a gorgeous house on the inside. It's so simple and maintenance-free on the outside. I mean, if you choose the right materials and the right aesthetic details, I think you can build a house pretty darn cheap.
I think it's an exercise we should attempt.
Yeah.
So we went down this track, but let's get back to the question here. So I just want to address the 100K home here. The consensus was that it would be nearly impossible, so I took a different tactic and bought a home for $30,000 on auction, and I am renovating.
That's a good way to do it,
Also a good way to go. I have a million questions for you, but I'm most interested in an effective way of creating an air barrier for the walls. I need to re-side the house and be bringing it down to the board sheathing. This seems like a good chance to use a peel and stick house wrap like Henry Blueskin. Putting zip sheathing on would be nice, but seems a lot more work because of the windows would have to come out. Plus, it would be expensive. Tyvek is way cheaper, but I'm not convinced that it could be installed uniformly enough to be effective. What would you guys recommend? The attic eaves and rim joists will be sprayed with closed-cell foam. I live in Plymouth, New Hampshire, which is cold and snowy. Thank you for your advice. So the house has board sheathing. He's re-siding anyway. How do you create an air barrier with the board sheathing, which have gaps between the boards? Go.
Consider putting your air barrier on the inside is one option.
Okay, what about water, though?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not going to take care of water. But, I mean, if you wanted to just do Tyvek, that'll handle your water. And then you can put your air barrier on the inside. But I don't know that I love that idea. I'm just saying that's an
What's the
alternative.
drawback?
I mean, you're going to have air leaking into the
Yes.
walls and potentially condensing on the back of your wallboard.
Right. So any gaps anywhere are going to let the cold or warm air from the outside get to the inside.
Yeah.
Or vice versa.
Well, he's doing spray foam anyway. Maybe he could consider a flash and bat. I mean, if he wasn't considering spray foam at all, I don't know if I would recommend that. But I mean, it's going to be messy because it's probably going to be leaking through the board sheathing as he's
What
doing
about
it,
his
but,
suggestion at the fully adhered WRB like Blueskin? So we should tell folks what that is. So it's a weather barrier. It's meant to be vapor permeable, but it's stuck on and it sticks to each other. And what do you think?
I wonder. I'd have to see the condition of the board sheathing to know. I mean, I wonder how that stuff would stick to some.
I think it was Tyler
board
Grace
sheathing.
used this on a house with board siding.
Did he?
I think, or board sheathing, and I'll look for that, and we'll
Okay.
put it on the podcast page. And he liked it for that. The stuff is expensive. Justin told me this morning it's about a buck a square foot when he last checked. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you can get a material to do more than one of your types of barriers, an air barrier and a water barrier, you're probably going to be saving some money and time. So something like that, if it would work with the board sheathing, I think would be a good idea.
I mean, if the house isn't too big, I would sure be tempted to pull the windows and re-sheathe it because I think it might be less expensive.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's a lot of work. And who wants to be pulling out windows when you're up on two sets of scaffold, right? So I think the Blueskin is a great solution.
But now this goes back to the whole question. I mean, I've asked multiple times for advice on siding on an old house on the GBA forum. And the thing that someone was bound to come back with every single time is that if you're pulling your siding and you're trying to do flashing or insulation details and you're not pulling your windows, how are you effectively flashing your windows? And I'm not saying it's not impossible, but it's
difficult.
It's difficult to get it right. I mean, you figure the sides and the top are fine. It's really the bottom of the window where you're concerned. And I almost have to wonder, would it be worth it to cut a kerf in and put a piece of flashing in underneath the windows after the fact, and maybe use liquid applied flashing to integrate that into the window? I don't know.
I don't know. I think you're on the right track, Jeff, excuse me.
But now, he was saying zip sheathing would be nice. I imagine he's expecting that he would tear off the old stuff, or do you think he would go over it?
If it were me, I'd go right over it.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah. It's not going to hurt anything.
Yeah. Again, it's just a matter of integrating. The big question here is not so much the choice that he makes, it's integrating it into the window openings.
Totally. So the other thing people do is if you want to add a new shading layer, you can put a band oftentimes around the perimeter of the casing to make it thicker. And in essence, doubling its thickness sometimes. And then you have room for a new sheathing layer or even strapping and an airspace. But then you have to reflash all the windows and figure out how to integrate that into the drainage plane.
I'm trying to picture that in my head. So
you leave the windows in place.
Yeah.
Assume they have a flat 1x4 or 5/4x4 casing.
Mm-hmm.
So on the outside perimeter, you add a band molding with mitered corners that goes around the sides and the top and back down the other side, and it just makes the window thicker. But you get to leave the windows, and it's a technique I've seen in an article I did for another company.
I don't know if you saw at the project house down the street before they were selling that. They put zip sheathing on, new zip sheathing on.
Over the window flanges?
Over the window flanges.
Some remodeler is going to be super psyched to find that someday.
Oh, man.
I was like, what is going on here?
Man.
Yeah.
Who's responsible for that?
I have no idea. I don't know who did it.
Oh, my God.
Shouldn't be admitting those things.
I know. That's terrible. On a lighter note, what do we got here, Jeff? I forget what I finally chose to put in here. Oh, yeah, this was sent by... Oh, man.
Concerned citizen.
A concerned citizen. Maybe we shouldn't tell who it was. So what's going on here, Rob?
What are they concerned about? That little bump out there?
Yeah, look how it's held up.
I can't say. There's a little tiny.
Can you go to the?
Are they shelf brackets?
Yeah.
So so basically it looks like it's probably a entryway off of a fire escape, the size of like
It
a
looks
closet,
like 4 feet deep. Yeah,
size of like a nice small coat closet.
and it's defying gravity, near as I can
Well,
tell.
so maybe it's cantilevered.
Yeah,
so
hopefully it's cantilevered.
So it's got a metal fire escape coming off one side, or staircase, which has these nice beefy metal brackets going back to the wall that are as deep as the staircase. But then
I think they're 2x4s, though.
oh, they would.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I don't know.
So brackets do not support decks, people. That's the thing that we can safely
Especially
say.
not something that you bought in the shelving section at the home center.
Or I think those are from Pottery Barn.
Yeah.
How does stuff like this not fall down?
I don't know.
It must be decorative. There can't be holding any load.
I mean,
So-
I'm always amazed at how sturdy and redundant wood frame structures are. Right? They seldom fall down.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even when they're seriously structurally deficient, they move slowly. They don't break.
Until a heavy snowstorm comes.
Yeah. So basically, it looks like someone decided to put the outhouse out the side wall of a second floor of a building, and it's over the sidewalk below. And
They used to do that in castles. If
Yeah.
you look for a hole, there might be a hole in the floor.
Yep.
Because that's where the toilet was,
is
right?
there,
exactly.
Is there a little hatch on the bottom of that thing in the picture?
There's no mention of where this is, but
I think we need to make this a regular piece. Everybody send in your photos
Of weird stuff.
weird details that you can see
please.
on houses, and we'll try to dissect them. I mean, obviously, it's a shame that people mostly listen to this and don't actually visually see the podcast, because it's kind of a neat little architectural detail
Yeah.
there.
We're not suggesting it's safe, but it is kind of cool. I agree. So you should go to the podcast page at finehomebuilding.com and check those out if you want to see a building that's defying at least part of a building that's defying gravity.
Nice.
You guys have anything else?
Nope.
Any feedback for listeners?
Just listen.
Listen, please. Comment. Like us.
I will say this is the first time I've been back in I think 4 podcasts. I don't know. We had a whole slew of new people in here. Well, we had Mike Gerton in here.
Yep, and Kylie.
And Kylie, our design editor, that was her first time, and I think she had a nice.
She
first,
knocked it out of the park.
She had a nice first episode there, and we even got some nice comments on the YouTube channel
Yes.
about her adding a nice.
It's new. It's nice to have a
Adding
new
to the
voice,
mix.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, totally.
Getting tired of hearing me.
What'd you think about the Gerton episode?
I haven't listened to it yet.
Have you listened?
I haven't listened to a single episode since I started being on the podcast.
What?
Well, this
Come
one
on.
you're not on it, so you're safe.
Yeah,
you can
I know
listen
that
to
one,
it.
so I can listen
Yeah.
to it.
So that was a different format. I was curious what people thought. So if you have any thoughts on that and interviewing the luminaries of our industry, I'm willing to do that anytime.
I certainly think we need more of that, because people like Mike Gerton need to be heard.
I liked talking to him about stuff that you don't ordinarily hear him talking about, right? Water management, decks, but how he got started in this business, his outlook on aging and being a carpenter. I think that was all pretty cool.
Was Addison on with him too?
Addison was also on.
Yeah,
and so we
that's
had
an interesting perspective.
Yeah, two people at different ends of the spectrum of their careers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Addison is Mike's one of his apprentices, right?
Yeah, they work
And-
together almost every day, as I understand it. And Mike is not like doing a lot of work for clients, but he's got rental properties and his parents' home and all kinds of stuff that he has to take care of. And, working by yourself when you're in your, I'm not going to say, gets to be difficult. He was talking about how growing up in an A-frame that his dad built. Did you know that?
No, I did not know that.
Did you know that?
I did know that. I've seen it.
You've seen it?
Yeah, it's a pretty building.
Is it?
Yeah,
Cool.
as far as A-frames go.
Yeah, I mean, he explained why his dad chose that as an engineer. He's like identified that as one of the most resource efficient structures you could build. And in their heyday, you could buy a book at the newsstand on how to build one by yourself, right? And so his dad did.
I think I'm coming up with another idea for an episode, a special episode. We need to have all weird and normal styles of construction, and the three of us need to vote on whether they actually make sense or not. Like,
I love
geodesic domes,
doing that.
ferro cement, earth
Domes.
ships.
Yeah.
We talked about earth ships.
Yeah,
Were you here for that?
yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
there's more than one way to build an earth ship.
I can't wait to hear. Toxic sludge? What?
I'm going to save that for next time.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for listening. This is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Matt, Rob, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you. Please remember to send us your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us wherever you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Thanks again for listening.